Just days after the marriage equality law took effect, Thailand's public health ministry made cross-sex hormones free for trans-identified citizens. This move underscores how the momentum from marriage equality is being leveraged to advance causes related to gender identity. While Thailand's progress on gay rights is celebrated, the push for gender recognition highlights how victories in same-sex marriage are increasingly being used to advance broader gender identity ideology.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending in January 31st, 2025. We are here with Joss, Jose, and me, Arianne. First, a summary of the week's news. Charges are dropped against whistleblower Eithan Haim. Thailand's legalization of same-sex marriage comes into effect. Activists in Pittsburgh are working to establish the city's first LGBTQ+ historic landmark. Women's sports activists from the group WomenAreReal testify in San Jose. A murder trial begins for 3 men charged in a New York City gay bar drugging scheme. Candice Jackson is renamed to the Department of Education as Title IX implementation changes course under a new administration. And President Trump issues a new executive order restricting pediatric transition, while the effects of last week's order restricting DEI reverberate. With that, we'll hand it to you, Jose.
Thanks, Arianne. Federal prosecutors have dropped all charges against Dr. Eithan Haim, a Texas surgeon who faced up to 10 years in prison for leaking medical records from Texas Children's Hospital. Haim had revealed that the hospital continued performing gender transition-related procedures on minors, despite publicly announcing in March 2022 that it would cease such treatments. The leaked documents show these procedures were carried out just days after the announcement and continued throughout 2022 and 2023. Haim accessed records of patients who were not under his care and shared them with conservative activist Christopher Rufo. What he blew the whistle on were mostly surgeries to insert hormonal devices that prevent children from going through puberty. While he partially redacted patient names, he left details such as diagnosis codes, procedure dates, and physician names visible. He pleaded not guilty, arguing he acted as a whistleblower to expose what he believed was medical harm. His case gained political attention, with Republican lawmakers, including Senator Josh Hawley, lobbying for dismissal. On Friday, the Trump administration Justice Department dropped the charges with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. Haim celebrated the decision, calling it a victory against government overreach. While TQ advocates condemned the Department of Justice move, warning it could undermine trust in medical confidentiality, Haim and his supporters framed it as a win for transparency and protecting children. Activists in Pittsburgh are working to designate the former Donnie's Place bar in the Polish Hill neighborhood as the city's first LGBTQ+ historic landmark. The bar served as a cornerstone of Pittsburgh's LGBT community for nearly 50 years, hosting drag shows, fundraisers, and community events while playing a critical role in HIV/AIDS outreach during the 80s. Now, with the building at risk of demolition, advocates are fighting to preserve its legacy. The nomination, submitted in October by Polish Hill residents with support from the nonprofit advocacy group Preservation Pittsburgh, argues that Donnie's Place meets 4 key criteria for historic designation: ties to important people, important cultural and social aspects, connections to historical themes, and its role as a familiar visual feature. The bar was owned by Donald Thins, a pivotal figure in Pittsburgh's LGBTQ+ community, who passed away in January 2023. However, the effort faces challenges. The property is owned by the state of Donald Thins, which has not supported the nomination. Additionally, developer Laurel Communities has proposed building 19 townhomes on the site, raising concerns about gentrification and the loss of affordable housing options. The nomination process began with a virtual public meeting on December 16th and will continue with a review by the Pittsburgh Historic Review Commission on February 5th. If approved, it will move to the City Planning Commission and ultimately to the City Council for a final decision. Supporters hope to preserve Donnie's Place as a physical reminder of Pittsburgh's LGBTQ+ history, with potential future uses including affordable housing for, quote, queer and trans elders, or a community center. As Pittsburgh considers this nomination, the outcome will not only determine the fate of Donnie's Place, but also set a precedent for how the city honors its LGBT heritage. Thailand made history this week as the first country in Southeast Asia to recognize marriage equality, with hundreds of same-sex couples tying the knot in joyous celebrations across the nation. The landmark legislation, which grants same-sex couples full legal, financial, and medical rights, was celebrated with a mass wedding event at Bangkok's Siam Paragon Shopping Center, where at least 200 couples registered their marriages. The new law replaces husband and wife with gender-neutral terms, a move hailed by Thailand's Prime Minister as a step toward greater awareness of gender diversity and equal rights for all. Among the newlyweds were trans-identified individuals in same-sex relationships, as Thailand currently has no legal avenue for changing the sex marker on official documents. The Thai parliament rejected a proposed gender recognition bill in February 2023, but activists are now pushing to revive the legislation. We should use marriage equality as an opportunity to open another door for gender recognition, said Hua Punya Piasomparm, a local trans activist. Just days after the marriage equality law took effect, Thailand's public health ministry made cross-sex hormones free for trans-identified citizens. This move underscores how the momentum from marriage equality is being leveraged to advance causes related to gender identity. While Thailand's progress on gay rights is celebrated, the push for gender recognition highlights how victories in same-sex marriage are increasingly being used to advance broader gender identity ideology. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Joss.
Thanks, Jose. That was really interesting about Thailand and the leverage of gay marriage. Thank you for sharing that. On Wednesday, January 29, some of the women from WomenAreReal gave speeches during the public comments of the Central Coast Section Board of Managers meeting. The Central Coast Section is part of CIF, which is the governing body for K-12 athletics in California. The ladies of WomenAreReal have been speaking at meetings all over the state for the last year and a half. It was only after reading the bylaws that Beth discovered there is a public comment period in these particular meetings. Taking advantage of this opportunity to share their insights, members Julie, Michelle, Amanda, Pat, Judy, Bev, and Beth all spoke. They were actually the only speakers to take advantage of the public comment period. The group said that this meeting felt different and that the attendees seemed to actually be listening this time. Notably, they received warm gestures from a few of the attendees, including a high five in the hallway after the speeches. They even had an extended conversation with one meeting attendee who thanked them for being there. While the women of WomenAreReal don't think CIF leadership will do anything substantively different, it appears members of that meeting are starting to soften to the message the women delivered. We will share some clips from their speeches and links to their social media accounts in our comment on this video and encourage you to find out more about the important work WomenAreReal are doing for women and girls in California.
Female athletes in California schools lose equality of opportunity because males who claim a, quote, female gender identity can compete on girls' teams. Scientific evidence demonstrates that significant male-female performance differences exist, even pre-puberty, and that male advantage cannot be removed by suppressing testosterone. You all know this, yet you do nothing. But the legal landscape and public opinion have shifted, and it behooves CIF and California public schools to take heed. A federal district court judge recently threw out then President Biden's Title IX revisions, that redefined sex to include gender identity. So Title IX is now the same as it ever was. Quoting the judge, quote, "Discrimination on the basis of sex means discrimination on the basis of being male or female," close quote. Gender identity is not covered. California's law allowing males to self-identify into the female category will not shield you from liability or loss of federal funding per Title IX. Another federal district judge in Connecticut made this clear when he denied a motion to dismiss a case brought by female athletes against the Athletic Association. Quote, "Title IX's regulatory scheme expressly provides that funding recipients' obligation to comply with Title IX is not obviated or alleviated by any state or local law or other requirement that conflicts with Title IX. Therefore, if the defendants were to confront a situation in which they could not comply with both Title IX and state law, Title IX would preempt state law," close quote. Female athletes and their supporters are newly emboldened to stand up for their rights. Revise your policies so that males can no longer compete on girls' sports teams or face more lawsuits, Title IX investigations, and loss of federal funding.
In some sad and disturbing news, a trial began this week involving 3 men, Jaquan Hamilton, Robert DeMario, and Jacob Barroso, who have been accused of working together to drug and rob at least 5 gay men, after meeting them outside Manhattan gay bars and nightclubs from spring of 2021 to fall of 2022. Assistant District Attorney Emily Ching said the 3 men would allegedly approach and befriend men who were already intoxicated and then suggest they continue partying elsewhere. Once in private, Ching alleges that the defendants worked together to drug the victims to the point of incapacitation using drug concoctions that included fentanyl. Once the victims were unconscious, the defendants would use facial recognition technology to access the victims' bank accounts and payment apps. They used this access to steal thousands of dollars and use the victims' payment apps to pay for food, shoes, alcohol, and other items. The defendants used this same method to drug and rob all 5 men. Unfortunately, 2 of the men did not survive. Julio Ramirez, a 25-year-old social worker, died in April of 2022, and John Umberger, a 33-year-old political consultant visiting from DC, died in May of 2022. In researching this case, it became clear that the connections among the various cases was discovered through the dogged pursuit of the Ramirez and Umberger families. Ching said, "The evidence will make it very clear that it does not matter who handed the drugs to the victims. The evidence will establish that each defendant intended to commit the robberies, succeeded together in committing the robberies, and as a result, the victims died." End quote. We share this story, in part, as a reminder to stay safe and, when possible, stay with friends when out at the club. And now to you, Arianne.
Thank you, Joss. And now to news from the new Trump administration. Candice Jackson has been reappointed as the Deputy General Counsel at the U.S. Department of Education, marking her return to a key legal role within the department. Jackson previously served in the Trump administration as the Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights and later as Deputy General Counsel. Her reappointment signals a potential shift in federal education policy, particularly concerning civil rights enforcement and issues of gender and sexuality in schools. Jackson, who is openly lesbian, has been a vocal supporter of the rights of lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals, while also expressing criticism of what she considers woke ideologies surrounding gender identity. She argued that the increasing focus on transgender and non-binary identities in education and policy has overshadowed the concerns of same-sex attracted individuals. Jackson played a significant role in revising Title IX regulations regarding how schools handle allegations of sexual misconduct. Jackson has been critical of the way gender identity issues have been added to educational policies, particularly in K-12 schools. She has argued against the inclusion of transgender ideology in classrooms, saying that discussions of gender identity should not be imposed on students. Her stance aligns with the broader movement within the LGB community that seeks to separate sexual orientation advocacy from gender identity activism. Jackson has pointed to what she sees as a growing disconnect between LGB rights and the broader LGBTQ+ movement, arguing that the latter has prioritized transgender issues at the expense of protection and recognition of same-sex attracted individuals. With her return to the Department of Education, many expect Jackson to continue advocating for policies that emphasize biological sex distinctions in law and education. Already there are signs that the Department of Education is changing course under this new administration. On January 31st, the Department of Education announced that it will begin enforcement of Title IX protections on the basis of biological sex. The letter, signed by Acting Assistant Secretary of Civil Rights Craig Traynor, said the Department of Education will again use the 2020 rules pertaining to Title IX implementation. These were rules that Candice Jackson played a crucial role in writing. Candice is a supporter of ours and helped us tremendously when we submitted public comments about Biden's proposed Title IX rule changes. We have also interviewed her a number of times, so we are looking forward to see what work she does for the Department of Education. And more news coming from the Trump administration. On January 28th, President Trump issued a new executive order establishing that it is, quote, the policy of the United States that it will not fund, sponsor, promote, assist, or support the so-called transition of a child from one sex to another, and it will rigorously enforce all laws that prohibit or limit these destructive and life-altering procedures, unquote. Okay, so that's the policy set by this order as provided in Section 1. And what else does this order do? Section 2 offers definitions, notably endorsing the term surgical and chemical mutilation instead of gender-affirming care. Because surgical and chemical mutilation is the terminology used in this order, that's the term I'm going to be using when discussing the specific provisions of this order. And by the way, the order also defines a child as someone under 19 years of age. So let's move on to what this bill does in practical terms. Section 3 ends federal reliance on WPATH standards of care, calling it junk science. Instead, this section empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services to create their own review of the research on the best ways to treat minors with gender dysphoria. This review is to be done within 90 days of the order. Section 40 removes federal educational and research grant funding from medical institutions that continue to perform genital and surgical mutilation of children. Section 5 offers a list of ways the Secretary of Health and Human Services is empowered to end the genital and surgical mutilation of children. One thing it is empowered to do is condition Medicaid and Medicare eligibility on compliance with this executive order. Section 6 and 7 go on to exclude the surgical and chemical mutilation of children from TRICARE coverage and other federal employee health benefits. TRICARE, by the way, is the medical care offered to military personnel and veterans and their families. Section 8 empowers the Attorney General to take various actions such as enforce laws against female genital mutilation, prioritize consumer fraud investigations regarding the long-term side effects of chemical and surgical mutilation, and prioritize investigations against so-called sanctuary states that try to protect chemical and surgical mutilation of kids. It also empowers the Attorney General to work with Congress to draft legislation to protect children who have been victims of medical malpractice regarding surgical and chemical mutilation. And in fact, on January 29th, Senator Josh Hawley, who's a Republican from Missouri, introduced legislation doing just that. It's called the Jamie Reed Protecting Our Kids from Child Abuse Act. And the remaining 3 sections involve technical procedures regarding enforcement of the order. So how big of a step is this? On one hand, it is fairly big. I'd say especially sections 4 and 5, as those could remove federal funding and Medicaid and Medicare eligibility from hospitals and medical schools that facilitate pediatric gender transition. That's a lot of medical institutions that are going to face financial pressure to pull the plug on the chemical and surgical mutilation of minors. At the same time, let us also consider what this bill does not do. It does not create a federal ban on pediatric transition. That is not within the president's executive power. It also still allows for private insurance companies to pay for minors' transition. So this executive order is by no means the final story on the saga of the medicalization on gender dysphoric minors. On top of this, likely in response to the order Trump issued last week that shut down federal DEI programs, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the Department of Justice Pride Group shut down. The Department of Justice, or the DOJ, Pride is an LGBTQ employee resource group founded in 1994. And while it claims it was LGBTQ, I'm suspicious it was always the case that it always included the Q and T. While it's hard to find any older information about the org, I did find on Google Books a 2000 publication called Do Your Legal Career Justice: Opportunities for Entry-Level Attorneys and Law Students at the U.S. Department of Justice. This informational booklet, which begins with an endorsement from then Attorney General Janet Reno, lists on page 12 a bunch of affinity groups within the Department of Justice, including DOJ Pride, which is explicitly described as a group for gay, lesbian, and bisexual employees. No T, no Q. I was also able to find via Wayback Machine an article on the Human Rights Campaign website from 2003 called HRC Decries John Ashcroft's Decision to Ban Gay Pride Celebration at Department of Justice. And this article also calls DOJ Pride an organization for gay, lesbian, and bisexual employees. An LGB group, if you will. I'm just pointing this out because if anyone is out there saying that we are a bunch of bigots for having LGB in our title as an org without the T or anything else, just respond to them by saying that it was perfectly respectable for LGB groups to exist in 2003, and HRC didn't seem to have a problem with it then. Anyway, back on the subject of DEI. Perhaps feeling empowered by the Trump administration's anti-DEI guidelines, a number of state and local governments are moving to restrict pride flags on public property. For example, a bill in Arizona was advanced to ban the pride flag from government property. According to reporting from Indian Country Today, the bill would only authorize governments to fly the flags of the United States, POW and MIA flags, the Arizona flag, the Arizona Indian Nations flag, First Responders flag, Historic American flags, and Blue Star Service or Gold Star Service flags. A similar ordinance has been proposed in Dumont, a borough of Bergen County, New Jersey. According to NJ.com, this ordinance would restrict flags on public property to the flags of the U.S., the state of New Jersey, the county, and branches of the military. Expect a lot of similar ordinances across the country to be proposed in the future. So what should well-informed LGBs think of these issues? Some would say DEI is an irredeemably flawed concept, while others may say dumping it entirely is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Likewise, even putting aside the pro-gender ideology progress flag, is there ever a proper occasion to fly the old-fashioned pride flag over government buildings? We're curious to know what you think. Let us know in the comments if you have an opinion on that. So I'm curious, what do you two think of this?
The DEI situation to me is, at this point, it does feel a little bit of a moot point in the sense that at least where gay concerns are part of the conversation. It doesn't at this point, where in 2000, you mentioned 2003, and even a little bit later, HRC and groups like that were focused on LGBT issues or focused on gay rights issues. And now it just feels like what we're advancing, if we're advancing anything, is the trans agenda. And so it feels for me, advancing anything in that way is disadvantageous to the gay cause.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how DEI would be relevant to LGBT people specifically. I just don't see, I mean, I think the situation is different with women and minorities in that that's more like out, like, and there are more issues with like underrepresentation of, you know, women in certain fields and minorities in certain fields. I just don't see how that would work with LGB people. I mean, at most I can see like, what are they going to like have a year, you know, a pride celebration at the, you know, work office. So I don't even know how DEI would be needed for us, but I mean, I could be missing something.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair if you know, if people in the comments want to share their thoughts about it, because maybe we're missing something, but it just at this point it feels like, at least for LGBT people, like you mentioned in particular, less of a useful tool than it potentially was in the past.
Yeah, and also with like the whole flag thing, I mean, I don't think either of these bills seem unreasonable because they're not specifically singling out the pride flag for a ban. They're just saying we should only have flags that are appropriate, which are, you know, state, local, some veterans related things. So I don't think that that's really an unreasonable demand.
Yeah, the flag issue, I remember distinctly in Orlando when the city was or the gay pride organizations were petitioning to have gay pride flags in downtown Orlando in like the gay district, which is basically just the center now. There's no gay district anymore. And it was important at that time because we didn't have gay marriage and we needed visibility. We need positive visibility and positive representation. And now we have gay marriage, and gay rights have just been subsumed by TQ activism. So to me, it feels, I sort of understand when people say they don't, that the flag doesn't represent them anymore, or that they don't feel. I felt a sense of nostalgia, and I always felt like seeing those colors meant that that was my family, those were my people, and there was a unspoken bond, and now it just doesn't, it's not the same anymore. It hasn't been. So I may be just jaded is the thing. Like it's just, I'm too far gone. I am that meme of the skeleton on the roller coaster. Like I've been in this long enough that I'm the skeleton now. I'm not.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking like what you're saying about like it sort of brings up like you're a family. I could see going back to like with DEI on that, like why there would be this LGB or LGBTQ, whatever you want to call it, affinity group in a department that goes back to the 1990s when there was a lot fewer gay rights than there are now. And I could see like employees there genuinely feeling, you know, insecure or fearful, and they want to have other people, other LGBs they can speak to. I just don't know. I don't think that that applies so much now.
Yeah, I would have to agree. It's because everybody is TQIA now. So it's no longer like you're a small specialty group that needs to find each other out and to have that bond, because now everybody can be part of that group. So it's not special. If everybody can do it, it's not special. Everybody can identify as queer. And lots of people who have nothing to do with same-sex orientation identify as queer. So it kind of like takes the wind out of the sails if you have LGBTQ group and the bulk of the group are heterosexuals. Is it really an LGBTQ group? I guess, if everybody can be queer, but it's not like there's just nothing, there's nothing left for gay people. Like it really does feel like we're at this point where we have to make new networks that are same-sex oriented and focused in same-sex orientation to have any kind of sense of community again. I mean, like we recall Barbara Giddings and Frank Meni, like all of these people protesting outside of government buildings for access to employment because they could be fired for being gay. Like we're not that far out from those key moments in gay history. So groups like this in the 90s would be extremely relevant. But now I just don't know.
Well, this whole thing of DEI in the workplace, I saw that LGB Alliance UK came up with a business forum to, I guess, lobby because of the protected characteristic of gender critical beliefs, so that businesses know that they should make accommodations for LGB people who are sex realists, and that was a great video that they posted on YouTube. So if anyone's interested in, business and LGB, I recommend people to watch it. It's specifically about LGB people. They talked about what Arianne said about not throwing the baby with the water. How's it goes? Anyway,
Get the bath water.
right, that. And so he said that not everything about DEI is, you need to get rid of, that LGBT people in the workplace do benefit from some sort of network.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that note about what the UK group is doing, because I think it is true that often it's political differences which result in a lot of discrimination in the workforce. And so having like a group that's like gender critical LGB actually could be very helpful for people who live in an environment or working in an environment where it just assumes that LGBs would take the, TQ plus standard line.
I am really excited about Candice's reappointment to the I just want to say this because I love Candice. I'm a super, super liberal person, lifelong Democrat, and I love that Republican lady. Like, she is the best, and I'm really excited about her reappointment. And I don't think I've ever said that about a Republican before.
Yeah, I love how Candice is this sort of link between, like, she's worked with some more radical feminist types, but she also works for the right. So I like how she's sort of like a link between, a bridge between those two worlds. And of course, being openly lesbian, I feel confident knowing at least that voice is there, a gay lesbian voice.
Yeah, that voice, and she really had like what she talked about in the Scrimetti, post Scrimetti interview we did with her and Glenna Goldis. Her points about being a conservative lesbian were really, really important to me to hear. It's a unique perspective, so I'm really excited that she'll be able to make some headway in the Trump administration in this way.
So with that, we thank everyone for watching. Once again, we encourage you to leave your own thoughts in the comment section, and we hope to see you again next week. Goodbye.